To everyone out there. This is Joe Green, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. Today, we're going to talk about the war on women. And in case you guys haven't been paying attention, there's an absolute war on women. Now, before I get started, I want to encourage you guys to like, subscribe, and share my video channels on my various platforms, especially if there's something beneficial to you that you believe that can be a benefit to you and other people may want to hear it. And I also encourage you to share it with other people, even if you disagree with me, because I believe that great discussions can come from that, and we can learn even when we talk to people who have a different opinion than we do. But if you've been following my videos and my teachings and my messages, et cetera, you'll know that I talk about the globalist agenda, and the globalist agenda that has come really, it's really has intensified over the last few years. And part of the globalist agenda is a thing called critical theory. Now, the globalists developed this in the Frankfurt School in Germany. It was a way to destroy the Judeo-Christian institutions that help to make a strong society, because the globalists slash Marxists knew that in order for them to overtake the world, they had to fight against the Judeo-Christian Western world. That's the thing that stopped them from advancing and fully pushing their agenda. And so this thing called the Frankfurt School, which was a think tank that they strategized on how they could destroy the Judeo-Christian Western world. And one of the strategies is called critical theory. So what critical theory does is it targets all the various institutions and erodes at them, tears them down, changes people's thought processes in order to weaken society, weaken families, and weaken individuals, so that the state itself can come in and take over. And basically what is called, and I've done a video, if you look at my YouTube channel, I did a video called The Revolution Without Tears. And so they came up with a strategy on how they can have they can have a takeover, but without bullets, guns, and any kind of violent revolution. And it's critical theory. And so again, critical theory is something that they've created. It targets the nuclear family. It targets Christian values and Christian belief systems. It targets gender and sexuality and all these type of things. And now it is actually targeting women themselves, not just men. It's targeting men too. But in this particular video, we're talking about how it targets women. Now, why do I say there's a war on women? And women, I would tell you, you should stand up and have your voices heard, because you are absolutely being replaced. You are being replaced. And also a thing that I always like, I have to take this back to the Bible, right? The biblical standard, or the biblical narrative, which gives us the insight for us to not be taken advantage of by these particular strategies, because we know ultimately, when you talk about globalism, you talk about a one world government, the head of those systems ultimately is the Antichrist and Satan himself. And so what does Satan always do? What Satan does is he presents things to you, and he presents it under the facade that it's for your good, for your it's in your best interest that you follow these strategies. So it has been presented to people of different lifestyle choices, different, it's been presented to them as though it's meant to help them, but ultimately it's meant for their destruction. For instance, the second wave feminism movement of the 1960s was a globalist led agenda that came under the guise of empowering and helping women, but actually it was meant to destroy women the long term. So when you look at these things, as I said before, and I'll get into the meat of this talk, if you look at past, present, and future, you'll have a better insight, especially when you look at it through a biblical worldview. You have a better insight as to what is happening or what is occurring. Right. So in the past, they take things that were real. There were times, and still in certain places, in certain areas, where women are abused, mistreated, or overlooked, or those type of things. It uses real grievances, but it exaggerates it to the place where it uses the solution as a tool for your destruction. And so second wave feminism came against the traditional roles of male and female in the family, and it was presented under the guise of trying to help women, but ultimately its goal was simply to destroy the family, which helps to destroy individuals, which helps to destroy the community as a whole. That was the strategy of it. So here's a couple of things I want to share with you that goes along with my point that I'm making. June the 1st, 2024, there's an article that I came across, and you can look it up for yourself. It says, the title of the article is Trans Woman Wins Miss Maryland USA, Making History on a List of Pageant Firsts. Bailey Ann Kennedy won the crown on June 1st, 2024. It says she's 31, she's married to a military officer, she's Asian American, and she's a trans woman. When Bailey Ann Kennedy was crowned on Saturday as Miss Maryland USA, she broke almost every barrier that existed in the state's pageant history, and she did it with her first pageant. Now, I don't know anything about this person, but what I will say is it's part of the agenda to allow her to win. Just like the gentleman who was the swimmer who Riley Gaines competed against. Riley Gaines and this trans person from University of Pennsylvania, they raced for the national title and in swimming, and they had it was a complete tie down to the 100th of a second tie, right? They both finished exactly at the same time. They only had one trophy because normally it's almost impossible for two people to have the exact time down to the 100th of a second. But what they did was they gave the trophy to the trans woman because of the agenda, because of optics. They wanted to say that this trans person has won this race, and this is how we are evolving as people. But ultimately what happened is this biological male who naturally would outswim most women, it was an unfair competition, shouldn't even been in the race. And to put it in perspective, this trans person, he was competing as a male for 3 years. Then all of a sudden he identifies as a woman and becomes the fastest woman, quote, I'm using, not really, he's biological male, but wins the women's race, right? He wins the national title for the women's swimming. Now, to put it in perspective, and I know a lot of people keep going back on the same thing, but there's a huge difference between biological males and biological females. And for the most part, just like in track and field, I'll give you an example. The number one woman last year in sprinting, a lady from Jamaica, who won she won the national, no, not the national title, she won the world title in sprints. If she was competing against the men, she would come in 200th place. Now, this is a fact. This is not something I'm coming up with. Her time would have made her 200th in the men's track, but she's the fastest woman in the world. And this is not a knock on a woman, but biologically, physically, women are different than men, and it's not fair that women and men compete together, or men can compete in women's sports. And the reason I say that, like I said, with the enemy, it comes across as though we are evolving, we are, everyone's accepted. But what is it doing? It's taking away opportunities from women. And so women fought long and hard to have their own, right? So whether it's women's basketball, women's track and field, they wanted to be recognized and have their own, and they have the right to have their own. And so now if you start to allow biological males to come in and compete against them, then the biological women are going to not win races, point blank. They're not going to win because they can't compete against a biological male. Now, that doesn't mean that none of them are like that. It doesn't mean that there are not any of them out there who can beat a man. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if you have a highly trained woman and a highly trained man, the man will win 99.99% of the time, right? So that helps me to transition now to basketball, right? We talk about Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark, this is an article, ESPN article. It says Caitlin Clark has been one of the biggest names in sports over the last year. Her time with Iowa, with the Hawkeyes in college, turned her into a superstar, and that title has been transferred to the WNBA. Despite Clark's being the NCAA's all-time leading scorer and leader in points per game for all rookies in the WNBA, she's receiving a majority scrutiny online. Clark has averaged over 15 points per game and 6 assists during her 2-9 stretch with the Indiana Fever to start the season. She's putting some decent numbers in the stat sheet, but there's a clear struggle for a first-year player. Now, the reason I brought this up is because recently they were picking the Olympic team, the USA women's basketball Olympic team, and they left Caitlin Clark off of the team. Right? I know she's a rookie; she's new in the league, but I'm going to tell you why this is significant. Right? So, WNBA has been women's sports in general, but especially women's basketball. They have been complaining that they don't make as much money as the men, or that they don't have as much attention as the men. Now, if we're being honest, there's a reason behind that. And part of it is this Marxist ideology that they should get equal pay. The reason the NBA players make so much money is because they generate so much revenue. That's why they get paid so much. The WNBA, just like college women's basketball, does not generate a lot of money. And if you look at the numbers, usually the women's NCAA tournament basketball, usually it loses money. Whereas the men's tournament makes like $11-12 million in profit. So naturally, the men are going to receive more money because they're generating more money. But the women want the same money, yet they're not profiting. It's not profitable. They're actually losing money. And in the WNBA is actually subsidized by the NBA, which is why the WNBA teams play in the same city as the NBA teams do, because the NBA team in that city actually subsidizes the WNBA. So what does this have to do with this talk? So you have someone like Caitlin Clark. Even last year, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, I'm going to include her in it too, but Caitlin Clark is the one who most people are talking about. So last year in the tournament, Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark had a shootout for the title. LSU won. Angel Reese becomes very popular and famous. The storyline was Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark. The next year, Caitlin Clark again goes to the finals. She loses to South Carolina, but again, she has a phenomenal season and she's a standout superstar, right? So all the talk is about Caitlin Clark. Now she goes to the WNBA, and instead of the WNBA women players embracing her, they're showing a lot of animosity towards her. And for her to be left off the Olympic team, I believe, was a misstep. Why? Because she is such a draw. It's going to draw more attention to women's basketball, and ultimately it will translate into them making more and more money. And to put it in another perspective, Tiger Woods, when he broke through as a superstar in golf, all the other men golfers were happy that Tiger Woods was doing as phenomenally as he was. Why is that? And I heard interviews. The other golfers were happy when Tiger was winning because so many more people start watching golf just because of Tiger Woods, so that they all profited off of Tiger Woods' success. And likewise with Caitlin Clark, the more she's successful and the more people watch her, the more people will start to pay attention. It'll bring more revenue because of more sponsorship, more viewers, et cetera, and ultimately it would be in the best interest of all of them. But when you think about it, many of these women are not understanding this particular aspect of supply and demand. And so instead of them embracing the success of Caitlin, now what I mean is, I don't mean not to compete against her. I mean, go at her. That's what makes sports so great, because of the fierce competition between people. But they should embrace her more, because it's going to be profitable for all of them. The more her star rises and she gets endorsements and people watch her, they're going to start tuning into the games. And case in point, the Indiana Fever, who's not a very good team, who Caitlin Clark plays for, actually has the highest viewership of all the WNBA teams. And so that just goes to show how one person like that will help profit everyone. But again, because they're not, most of them are not understanding this free market capitalistic society that we live in. So instead of them embracing her success, many of them are have a lot of animus towards her. Let me go to the next article. And again, this is all showing of the great war that's on women. This one really is kind of disturbing. These next two are very disturbing. So June 10th, which was yesterday, there's an MSN article. The title of it is Top Cancer Charity Makes Woke Apology for Using the Word Cervix instead of Front Hole. Now, this is unbelievable, but this is real. You can look it up for yourselves, and this is really disturbing. In a significant update to their communication, the Canadian Cancer Society has shifted from using the word cervix to front hole in their cervical cancer information pages. I'm going to say this again. I want you to hear what this article says. It says the Canadian Cancer Society has shifted from using the word cervix, which is a biological term for a woman's anatomy, from using the word cervix to front hole in their cervical cancer information pages. This change, detailed in a section titled Words Matter, aims to better reflect the diverse identities of those they serve, recognizing the importance of language that includes everyone. Now, let's be honest, we're really sliding into insanity with things like this. So instead of using the actual biological term, which is cervix, they don't want to offend trans people. And so they're saying front hole. I mean, that is absurd. And what I'm saying is, I'm a little perturbed about it myself, but if I was a woman, I would be extremely um, upset about that, because what is it doing? It's downplaying women with cervical cancer. If a woman has a cervical cancer or has cervical cancer, then why not just use those terms? Why be so concerned with not offending someone else who doesn't have a cervix? It just doesn't make sense. And you have to recognize that it is part of the strategy of the enemy, because as I've said previously, um, words are important, right? Truth is important. And so what the enemy does, one of the strategies is to change words, because if you can control words, then you can control thoughts. Ultimately, when you change language, that's why when I talked about critical theory, um, uh, political correctness is part of the strategy. If you ever read 1984, George Orwell's 1984, which is a dystopian novel, which is very prophetic, because one of the things that they did, Big Brother did, was in order to control the masses and people's thought processes, they began to change language, and they called it newspeak. And then they started to tell people what they could use, what words they could use, and what they couldn't use. And so this is very dangerous, people, whether you think it's no big deal or not, because the more they can control language, they control your thought process. And so now they'll have you believe that a biological male who identifies as a trans woman can have a baby. And that's absolutely not true. A woman, I've heard it said that the word woman comes from the concept of a man with a womb, or a human being with a womb. And that's where we get the concept of a woman, a mother, right? And so they're changing all these words around. Even some documentation, instead of saying a woman or a mother, they call them birth-giving humans or something like that. Instead of a baby being a boy or girl, they're calling it a thing or it. And so you have to be very careful. This is a very devious strategy that the enemy is employing. And so that's why we have to be very vigilant and diligent in not allowing ourselves to fall victim to that. And the last one is trans woman wants a uterus transplant to have an abortion. Now, this is an August 25th, 2023 article from Sky News Australia. Sky News Australia. And the article says a trans activist has posted a video on Twitter expressing their wish to have a uterus transplant in order to become the first trans woman to have an abortion. Now, if you're not disturbed by these type of things, I don't know what to say to you. I mean, it just shows how far we're going away from reality, how effective the enemy strategy is, and how it is truly will lead to the destruction of society if we're not careful. Now, of course, we have confidence and faith because we know the Lord is soon to return, right? When Jesus comes back again, he's going to do away with all that. But what my concern is that what kind of a world are we living in now? But more importantly, what kind of a world are we leaving for our children and our grandchildren? See, that should be our major concern, because maybe these things don't affect you. Maybe it doesn't bother you. But ultimately, if we ignore these things, then we are setting up for a world where our children are and our grandchildren are totally controlled. They will have no say over things, and reality will be completely done away with. And whatever narrative is being pushed is the one that will be accepted. And I'm going to leave you with this scripture as I bring this to a close. You know, the Bible talks about sin and the core of sin. And so you got to realize that that's what all this is about. When the enemy does, when he presents something to you and he presents it under the guise that you are, he presents it under the guise that it's in your best interest. What he does is he appeals to your fallen nature. He's appealing to your human nature, and that human nature that goes in contrast with the spirit of God is what he taps into, right? And so what does it say in 1 John chapter 2 verse 16? For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And that means of the enemy, right? Because the world and the kingdom of God are in direct contradiction and opposition to each other. And so as the Bible says, to love the world means you don't have the love of the Father inside of you. One more thing before I go is I would encourage you guys to get a copy of my latest book, which is called The Religion of Race. And I had a copy right here, and I set it down somewhere. Here we go. So you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it if you DM me or text me. We'll make sure we get a copy, a signed copy for you. But the book is called The Religion of Race, and in the book I talk about race and religion from a historical, cultural, and biblical standpoint. And I think it's such an important conversation for us to have now in this day and age, because the enemy's job is to create division, create hatred, and create animosity towards people groups. And race is one of the most prominent and prevalent ways that he does that. This has been Joe Green. Please, again, subscribe, share, like the channel. And until next time, peace and blessings to you. We love you in Jesus' name. Shalom.